Mình sẽ gửi cái link ở trong phần chat nha, các bạn có thể vào đấy. À, bây giờ thì mình sẽ mở video lên nhé. Ở trong phần chat nha, các bạn có thể vào đấy.
Hello, my name's Dave Neal. I'm the Animal Welfare Director for Animals Asia Foundation, and I'm going to give a talk today as part of our One Life series on animal consumption and some of the implications both for the welfare of animals, our own human health, as well as the environment. So obviously, consumption, the food that we eat, is very much a personal choice. We are in control of what foods that we want to eat, but it has implications. It has implications for our own health. It certainly has implications in terms of the way that we produce food on the environment, and it has very specific implications on the welfare of the animals that we raise for us to eat. So first of all, I'm going to take a look at some of those animal welfare issues. I'm going to start by looking at the raising of pigs for us to consume. So globally, we estimate that there are something in the region of 1.3 billion pigs which are being farmed every single year to be slaughtered for our consumption. Now, within Vietnam, the number is somewhere between 20 to 30 million pigs which are being produced every year, and that number is at the moment seems to be rising. The majority of pig production in Vietnam has historically been through these quite small scale productions. So farmers with under, say, 100 pigs, has been a lot of these all over the country. And what has happened in recent years is that this has led to a lot of disease problems, things such as African swine fever and blue ear disease have been major problems for the pig industry in Vietnam. And the disease has spread very quickly through a lot of these small-scale production systems. And what this is doing is it's very much pushing the industry towards intensification, with the idea that intensive production, larger scale but smaller numbers of units, can actually manage disease better than some of the small scale units. And this is really what has happened globally as pig production numbers have increased. Then producers have turned to more industrial types of farming methods. So in this case, these are something called sow stalls. So these are for the pregnant sows before they give birth to their piglets. Pigs, the sows here are contained in this very small environment. It's very restrictive. It doesn't allow them really to be able to turn around. They can lie down and stand up. That's about the only movement that they can do within these sow stalls. They suffer from a number of welfare problems, including abrasions and injuries which they get from rubbing against the metal bars here. But they also suffer often from leg problems and muscle wastage as well, because they don't have that ability to exercise. But also they suffer behaviorally by being kept in these conditions, because obviously of the boredom and not being and the frustration of being kept confined in this way. Then it often leads to them bar chewing. So they spend a lot of time chewing the bars as a firstly, presumably as a way of trying to actually find a way to escape from those conditions, but then as a stereotypic behavior. And this obviously is leading to them suffering from very poor welfare. These sow stalls, which are now in use globally, have been banned. They've been banned in the United Kingdom. They are banned for majority of the time in the European Union, and now countries such as Australia and New Zealand in the last few years have also introduced bans for the majority of the time, which means that the majority of times sows can't spend their majority of the time in these types of conditions. But in other countries of the world, then they're still very much in use. And here is a video which just gives an idea of the conditions. As you can see, it's highly restrictive and very stressful for the pigs to be kept in these conditions. The sows have their piglets, and then once the piglets are weaned, then the piglets are then likely all put together. And often in an intensive system, again, they will be put into very crowded conditions. So these might be indoor barns on concreted slatted floors, often with little or no bedding, so straw or hay to provide any kind of comfort for the pigs. And this leads again to them being incredibly frustrated. You can imagine young piglets are very inquisitive and very active, and they don't have that ability to be able to carry out their behaviours. So it often leads to them fighting within these conditions. And also the slats, the concrete slats on the floor often lead to them developing foot problems and lameness. And again, it's a short video just to give you an idea of the sort of how these pigs are living.
Conto totale.
Again, a highly restricted environment. And what this often then leads to is the pigs have an inability to carry out their natural behaviours. Pigs naturally in the wild would be rooting in the ground and in the soil, looking for their food, obviously over quite a large area and environment. In these conditions, then they're very restricted. They don't have that ability to root in the ground, and it redirects that behavior, and it often leads to problems, as we mentioned, with them fighting, but also often with them biting the tails of other pigs. And so this has led to try to manage this problem, then rather than looking at the issue and saying this is not a good way to manage pigs because it causes a significant amount of injuries and health problems for pigs, then the industry generally looks at trying to manage the problem by cutting the tails off of the piglets and also clipping the teeth of piglets to try to make them less sharp. So obviously reducing the length of the tail means that there's less for another pig to bite onto and to damage. And obviously reducing the sharpness of the teeth can actually mean when they do bite, then there's less of an impact. And this often happens without any anesthetic whatsoever. So you can imagine in an industrial unit, you've got many hundreds of piglets, and the farmers will just cut off the tails and then clip the teeth of those pigs, again, causing them a significant amount of pain and a significant amount of suffering due to the fact that none of that is being done with any kind of pain relief. In addition, the males are often castrated as well. Again, this can help to reduce the amount of hormones in the body for a couple of reasons. One, to try to reduce those hormones which potentially are going to cause a degree of aggression. So therefore, reducing the aggression between individual pigs by reducing the hormone levels in the body. But also, if the pigs are allowed to grow to a certain age, then those hormones can actually impact on the taste of the meat when the pigs are killed. So it's done for 2 reasons. But the important thing from an animal welfare point of view again is that this is often being done without any pain relief at all. So it's causing these piglets a significant amount of pain and a significant amount of suffering. And then as those pigs grow, then obviously the conditions are likely to become even more crowded. And this overcrowding is very much likely to promote the spread of bacteria and viruses between pigs. Pigs are often spending a large amount of time in their own excrement in these industrial units. And as you can imagine, this is likely then to cause disease to spread. What this means is that to try to prevent the animals from becoming ill, then they're often given a large amount of antibiotics. Now, these antibiotics are given both to try to combat some of the bacterial infections within these units, but also as growth promoters to try to increase the growth rate of these pigs so that they produce more meat for when they're being slaughtered. And then once the pigs are at a slaughter age, then they need to be transported. So again, transported either to a market or transported directly to a slaughterhouse. And again, pigs often suffer quite considerably during this transportation period. They're often put into situations such as these ones. So on the left-hand side, you can see here, they are just piled on top of each other on the back of a truck, which is going to cause them a significant amount of suffering. On the right-hand side is the much more small-scale method, which we often see within Vietnam, with pigs which are put into small cages and then on the back of motorbikes or small trucks. Whichever method is being used is likely to be very stressful. Pigs do not have the ability to sweat, so therefore they often suffer very badly from heat stress, particularly when they're being transported during the hot conditions during the day. And many pigs are likely to suffer from injuries, but also die during that transportation process. Now, there are laws around the world in terms of animal transport, and Vietnam has recently developed the veterinary law, which will hopefully start to address some of these issues of the way that animals are being raised and also the way that animals are being transported. But there's still a long way to go before conditions like this for the pigs are stopped. And then we also need to look at some of the treatments, both during the transit and when they arrive at either at a slaughterhouse or at the farm. The treatment is often quite brutal. You can imagine pigs are very stressful in this situation. They're arriving into a new situation, completely unaware of what is coming next. They're very fearful. And in some cases, then this leads to them being very badly mistreated. So they're being pushed and prodded and poked so that they move from one place to another without any consideration for their welfare. And then in an industrial slaughterhouse, pigs will be slaughtered by, firstly, electric prods will be put on the side of the head, and they will receive an electric shock, which is meant to render them unconscious. They will then be strung up by one leg, and their knife will slit their throat so they will bleed out, and hopefully they will then die. Unfortunately, the electric shock doesn't always work in every situation, and animals are sometimes conscious when they're being bled out, which obviously is going to cause a significant amount of suffering prior to death. And also then the body then, once it's bled out, will then be generally put into a boiling water vat, which then softens it so that it can be processed much easier. And in far too many cases, unfortunately, we're talking about many millions to billions of animals every year, then animals will not be dead when they go into that boiling water vat. So the potential for suffering at the point of slaughter is huge. And unfortunately, many millions of pigs will suffer considerably during that slaughter process. If we switch then to the production of broiler chickens, or chickens for us to consume, then globally we estimate there are somewhere in the region of 58 billion hens which are farmed for their meat every single year around the world. This could be anywhere up to somewhere around 500,000 of these in Vietnam at the moment. And again, Vietnam is moving towards more intensification. As we know, a lot of small-scale farming in Vietnam, but these types of intensive broiler chicken sheds are becoming more popular, and there's a policy within the government to try to move towards much more of this kind of intensification, to try to produce more food for people to consume within the country. One of the major problems of broiler chicken farming has come over the years is that we want the chicken to grow as big and fat as possible in as short a space of time. So if we look at these different sizes of chickens, then back in the 1950s, after 56 days of growth, the chicken would be around about 900 grams, you can see on the left. By the 1970s, 1980s, that would almost double, because we'd selectively bred chickens to grow faster. So we purposely manipulated the breeding stock of chickens so that we breed chickens which are fast-growing chickens. By the year 2005, this has gone up to a chicken which grows to now over 4,000 grams, 4 kilos, in just under 56 days. And as you can imagine, then this is causing a significant amount of problems. Over 25% of these chickens are likely to suffer from some form of heart defect due to the rate of growth. And also there'll be many suffering from other ailments as well. In particular, things like lameness, which is said to impact some 75% of broiler chickens, are classified as having some degree of lameness by the time they get to 6 weeks, which is about the time when they're due to be slaughtered for consumption. And this obviously is due to the fact that their body is growing so fast, and then often the bones in their legs are just not able to keep up with the weight of that growth. This lameness causes many problems. One, it's going to cause the animal some suffering. It means that the animal is less likely to be able to access food and access water because it's painful for them to move around. And it means that they spend a considerable amount of time lying on the floor of these sheds. Now, the floor of these sheds is now full of the excrement of the birds which are in it, because the flooring is put in on day one when the chicks are in, and then it is left in there throughout the whole period that the hens are growing until the hens are going to slaughter, and then it's likely to be removed, which means that it contains high concentrations of things like ammonia, which is something which causes a lot of burns in these animals. So animals which are spending a lot of time actually on the ground, particularly with their hocks down on the ground or their breasts on the ground, then suffer from these hot burns from the ammonia, or they get blisters. And many chickens suffer from something called foot pad dermatitis, again, from spending all of their time in these types of conditions. Here's just some footage from a UK chicken farm to give you an example. So you can see that there's a considerable number of welfare problems for hens which are being raised in these intensive conditions. And then finally, just looking at egg-laying hens, another industry, obviously, which has huge numbers of individuals. So an estimated over 6.5 billion egg-laying hens are farmed every year to produce eggs for our consumption. And many of these, again, are in intensive production, and increasingly within Vietnam, then intensive systems are being used to produce more and more eggs for consumption in the country. Via intensive production, it means that the eggs the chicks are hatched in industrial hatcheries. So the eggs will be placed inside trays, inside a hatchery, and then generally those eggs will hatch at about the same time. As you can imagine, the egg industry only needs female hens. It has no use for male hens. So what happens is once they hatch, then all of these chicks will be put onto a conveyor belt. And as that conveyor belt is going, then somebody will hand sort them into males and females. If the females, then they will carry on to go to the next stage where they will grow and go on to an egg production farm. If they're males, then they have no use for them, so therefore they are instantly killed. And generally, they will go into something which is just a system which churns them up, so it actually just crushes the body. So there isn't any consideration for the welfare of those individual chicks, or any moral consideration to whether that chick has a right to life or not, unfortunately, if they're a male chick. To try to reduce the impact of housing animals like hens in very restricted conditions, then the hens will have the tips of their beaks cut off usually within the first day or so. This again can cause them quite significant amount of pain and suffering. The tips of the beak has nerve endings, so it is a painful process. But it's been done again to try to manage a problem in these intensive systems where hens are put into these systems in very tightly packed conditions with nowhere for them to be able to move and no enrichment for them to be able to carry out any of their natural behaviors, which means they resort quite heavily to pecking at each other. And as you can see, this often leads to quite heavy feather pecking in chicks, with chicks having lots of feathers removed by the other chicks, and also leading to quite a significant number of injuries. Due to the fact that these individuals are being bred to produce as many eggs as possible, then again selective breeding has been used to try to make sure that we're only using hens which produce more eggs than would be natural. And this leads to calcium deficiencies, because all the calcium in the body is going, or a lot of the calcium in the body is going towards egg production, which means that hens often suffer from things like osteoporosis and leading to brittle bones. So they're much easier for them to fracture and to break their bones in these conditions than it is for healthier hens which haven't gone through the selective breeding process. And also they spend a lot of time on these wired floors with no ability for them to scratch. So no way of them actually to file down their nails, which they would do naturally if they were out in a more extensive area. So for intensive produced hens, then those claws often grow, and this is obviously going to cause a significant amount of pain and suffering as well. And then finally, for the hens, it doesn't matter whether you're a broiler hen, which is being produced for meat, or you're an egg-laying hen, then the catching and the crating process is often going to be quite brutal. So once it comes to the point where the hens are going to be slaughtered, so if you're a broiler hen, then that's usually after somewhere around 6 weeks, then the hens are caught and they're crated and sent to slaughter for a consumption. If you're an egg-laying hen, then it's likely to be between 18 months and 2 years, where the the industry says that you're no longer likely to be producing as many eggs as you were, so therefore you're being caught. Often this is being done by people that haven't had any training or a huge amount of training in how to handle animals and how to respect the welfare of their animals. So therefore there's often quite a considerable amount of rough handling of hens whilst they're being caught. You can imagine it's a very stressful situation, and then they're put into these crates where they're packed in and then sent off for slaughter. And again, you can see on the left here is something which is more of a sort of a large scale where there's many thousands of hens. Often hens will suffer from heat stress during the transportation, and again this depends on when they're transported and which countries they're being transported in, but heat stress is a major cause of death for millions of hens which are transported every single year. And then obviously there's also the more traditional way of transporting hens from some of the small scale producers, particularly as we see within Vietnam, where they are all being tied on to something like a motorbike, which again is going to lead to some very bad injuries, but also a significant amount of pain and suffering for the individuals as they're being transported. If they are going to an industrial slaughterhouse, then the birds will be hung upside down by their feet, and you can imagine then a lot of these are now suffering from weak bones or injuries during the raising or the catching process. So this is going to cause them some suffering, and generally they'll have their heads dipped into an electrified water bath, which supposedly would stun them. In many cases, then the bird will manage to avoid the electrification, which then means it goes to the next stage of this conveyor belt, where it will be killed via a blade over the neck. And as you can see, then in many cases, this means that unstunned birds are being killed or whilst they're still conscious, which again is leading to a significant amount of suffering for those individuals. So just looking at it then from an age point of view, if we look at the age of animals when they're killed on average against their natural lifespan, then we can see what decisions we're making of those animals, those ethical decisions that we're deciding to say that we're going to take the life of these animals. So for pigs can live for something up to 12 years. Generally, they're being slaughtered at just 6 months of age. For male dairy cows, then they can live for over 20 years, and they're likely to be slaughtered between 1 and 24 weeks old. And again, this keeps going on. If we look all the way down at the bottom, then chickens, which are bred for their meat, could live for 8 years, and yet they're being slaughtered at just 6 weeks old. So again, our choice to consume these animals means not only that it causes them significant amount of welfare problems, but there's an ethical issue there in terms of not allowing those animals to live out their natural lifespans. Moving away from the animal welfare issues then onto some of the environmental issues, then I think we're all now aware of some of the major environmental issues which are being caused through the mass production of animals for our consumption. The livestock sector is responsible for large-scale water pollution. This is being seen across the globe, and this is mainly in part due to the input of nitrogen and phosphorus, which then is running off from farms or from industrial units into water sources from the fertilizers which are being used, and obviously causing mass sort of river pollution. And there are areas now which have got huge, what we call die-offs of natural life, where there's just no natural life in rivers and lakes because of this huge amount of industrial scale pollution from agriculture. Livestock production is said to be responsible for 37% of the global methane emissions, 65% of global nitrous oxide emissions, and 9% of the global carbon dioxide emissions, with the agriculture sector in total being responsible for over 14% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So therefore, it's having a significant impact on climate change, which we're all very much aware of. Is something that needs to be addressed. Livestock production is also responsible for 64% of ammonia emissions as well, and this is causing quite large-scale air and soil and water pollution. So again, having a significant negative impact on the environment due to our raising of animals for our consumption. Livestock production is particularly inefficient as well. If we look at the figures in terms of conversion of calories, then this shows that the number of kilocalories of fossil fuels, which is the input which are needed to be able to produce these animals, against the kilocalorie of protein, which is output. So it can take anywhere between 20 and over 70 kilocalories of fossil fuel to produce a kilocalorie of protein for an intensively reared cow. And again, you can see the numbers for pigs and for chickens are much less than intensively reared cows, but again are still much higher than for most of our vegetables, which are taking a lot less fossil fuel input to be able to produce the same amount of protein output, which is what we want for consumption. It also leads then to some food security issues. It's now estimated that 43% of all the world grain harvest is being fed to livestock. And this is whilst there are billions of people which are suffering every single day without having access to enough food, whilst over 40% of the grain that we're producing is not going to those people, it's going directly to the animals so that it can then be converted into food for us to eat. But again, this is an inefficient system. You can see through the diagram. Then again, to produce a pound of protein, or animal protein from a cow generally requires around about 7 pounds of input from feed. Again, for pigs, it's 4 to 1, chickens and fish about 2 to 1, so twice as much input as there is output. And again, this is an inefficient system, which is only going to get worse in terms of as we need more and more food for people to eat, we're using an inefficient system to feed our global population. 23%, nearly a quarter of all global freshwater supplies are also being used to grow food to be fed to farm animals, whilst there are over 700 million people in the world which don't actually have access to enough fresh water to drink on a daily basis. So again, huge amounts of good quality fresh water supplies are being used specifically to grow food so that it can be fed to animals, rather than they're being given access to people that actually don't have that access. And again, this is leading to water security threats. You can see here some of the reasons why this is an inefficient system. Once again, similar to what we were just looking at previously, in this case with regards to the water input. So the gallons of water input to get a pound of animal protein out. So to get a pound of beef is likely to be in the region of 1,800 gallons of water needed to produce 1 pound of beef. Again, you can see here for pigs, it's 756 gallons of water needed. For hens, slightly less at 400, just over 400. But for some of the pulses and the soya beans, then it's much less. So in less than 200, or less than 250, down to less than 100 for the pulses, of gallons of water needed to produce a pound of protein, which is what we need to eat. So again, an inefficient use of water to be able to produce animals at this scale. And we're now using more than 1/3 of the world's land surface. It's been devoted entirely to either growing crops or to livestock production. So 1/3 of our land surface now is developed for agriculture. Now, obviously, some of that is for us to consume directly, but a huge amount of that is going directly to then feed the animals, which then are taking up even more land so that we can grow them so they can be killed for our consumption. And if we look at that in this graph, then you can see that it can take over 30 square meters of land to produce 1 kilogram of beef, and over 20 square meters of land to produce 1 kilogram of pork, whereas it will take less than 5 kilograms to produce fruits and potatoes, and 5 square meters of land to produce 1 kilo of fruits and potatoes and vegetables. So again, a very inefficient system, which is using huge amounts of land to produce animal protein rather than producing, rather than us getting all of our protein from fruits and vegetables. And some estimates suggest that every minute we're now chopping down over 1,500 trees to make room for us to farm the animals and also to grow the food that we need to be able to feed these animals. And as you can imagine, then this is leading to some major wildlife conflicts in areas, particularly the famous one obviously being in and around the Amazon rainforest, where huge tracts of land are being removed to grow food and to ranch cattle. And this then reducing the habitat which is available for the animals, which reduces those numbers of animals which are within those habitats as well, but also having an impact globally on carbon sink, with reducing our overall carbon sink, which is then having a bigger impact on climate change. So again, something that has to be addressed as soon as possible. And this problem is set to get worse if we carry on with this trajectory. In 2012, it was estimated there were 7 billion people and some 60 billion land animals, which were being raised to feed these 7 billion people. By 2050, we're estimating there's going to be 9 billion people, and they're almost twice as many land animals. As consumption rates continue to go up, then consumption per person goes up, then it's likely they could need to be 100 billion animals. And the planet just does not have the capacity to be able to go up to that scale to feed everybody. So something has to be done drastically to try to prevent that. And then finally, just looking briefly at some of the human health risks of animal consumption. There are some public health threats, as we mentioned earlier. Many animals receive a huge amount of antibiotics, both to control diseases during intensive production, but also with growth promoters to try to increase the conversion of try to grow, so those animals grow faster so that they can be slaughtered earlier. This is now leading to a lot of antibiotic resistance within the general population as people consume these products and can consume some of the residue of the antibiotics. The bacteria which these antibiotics were being developed to tackle are becoming much more resistant to the antibiotics because they're widespread use in intensive farming. And this is now leading to many thousands of deaths, unnecessary deaths of people from diseases which we have antibiotics to tackle, but they're no longer being as effective as they were. And this is something which is being addressed globally, but not quickly enough. So unfortunately, the antibiotic use in intensive farming is still very widespread. And we also know that eating animal fats and animal proteins can increase our risk of developing certain types of cancers, developing diabetes and heart disease. And over 60% of deaths globally now are coming from non-communicable diseases which are linked to our diet. So you can see the scale of the problem. So high animal protein intake, and especially from processed meats, is positively associated with cardiovascular mortality. So this is people suffering from heart-related problems from eating large amounts of processed meat. And this is generally due to the high salt and the saturated fat content, which is leading to high levels of cholesterol, which have an impact on the artery walls, and therefore are likely to cause people to have heart diseases, which is causing many people to die. And consumers of high animal protein diets are also known to have higher blood pressure levels. Again, another major factor for coronary heart diseases, but also strokes. And meat and dairy diets also contain higher amounts of saturated fats. And these are linked to the increased risk of type 2 diabetes, as they can impact the transfer of sugars from the blood to the muscle cells, and so therefore we're seeing a higher rate of type 2 diabetes in people in many countries, and particularly related to people that are having that consume high amounts of animal protein. Consuming dairy products also has an increased risk of developing things like prostate cancers. Dairy generally boosts something called insulin-like growth factors in the bloodstream, and these growth factors then are promoters of cancer cell growth. So high dairy production can actually lead to the development of more cancers, and one particular one being the prostate cancer in men. And eating a diet high in red meat is also known to increase the risk of developing colon cancer, such to the point that it determined that processed meat is actually carcinogenic.
Hình như là Mạo vừa bị chập chờn đúng không ạ? Alo, mọi người có nghe thấy mình nói gì không?
Related to people that are having
cứ tiếp tục đi em, mạng nó vừa bị out đó.
High amounts of animal protein. Consuming dairy products is also 2004 of hormones that contain high, so it designated it as carcinogenic, and this is mainly due to the presence of preservatives within the meat, which when they're being cooked can then lead to chemicals in the body which are again promoting cancer cell growth. And again, dairy products contain high levels of hormones. They contain high levels of growth factors, which are being put into these animals so that they produce more of the products that we desire. And these have also been shown to increase the risk of developing breast cancer for females. So if we look at this graph, you can see this is showing the meat consumption in kilograms per year for various countries. Now, it doesn't particularly matter which types of animals people are eating, it's just really the total amount. So you can see meat consumption is highest in countries such as the United States of America, Australia, Argentina, Canada, Brazil all have very high meat consumption rates. And then if we look at some of the major causes of diseases in these countries, then you can see for America, for Canada, for Argentina, for Brazil and Australia, then heart disease is one of the major health problems, and as it is now in many parts of the world. And again, a contributing factor of this is likely to be the increased consumption of animal proteins, which would lead into some of these heart disease issues. Again, if we look at some of the cancers, then we can see a correlation between the amount of calories that somebody takes in from animal food as opposed and the incidence of things such as intestinal cancer. So as people eat more animal protein, then in that country, then the incidence of intestinal cancer is higher, and similar for prostate cancer. So in this case it's being related to the amount of calcium from animal sources, so dairy products that somebody consumes. So in countries with higher dairy product intake, then we see higher levels of prostate cancer in general. So just to finish then, the opposite of that, in regions where plant-based diets are much more common, then the national and the regional rates for these types of diseases, these heart diseases and these cancers, are often considerably lower compared to areas where animal-based diets are more prevalent. And so then to conclude, the obvious conclusion from that is that adopting either a pure plant-based diet or reducing your meat and your dairy consumption levels is going to be good for many reasons. Firstly, it's going to be very good for the animals. If we need to raise less animals to be slaughtered, then that's a good thing for those animals that don't suffer. It's going to be much better for your health, as explained just now in some of the diseases that we talked about, which are linked to high intake of animal proteins. And very importantly, it's going to be much healthier for the planet as we start to tackle some of the major issues of climate change. And one of the major contributing factors of that being obviously the livestock sector. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. I hope that it's given you some food for thought in terms of your consumption, and hopefully it will make you look at the foods that you're eating in a different light. We can all do something to minimize the impact both on animals, on our own health and the environment via the choices that we make every day. So this is something which we are all empowered to do, whether it be for the welfare of individual animals, or whether it be for our own health, or whether it be for the health of our planet. Let's at least make those choices and start to reduce or cut out the consumption of meat and dairy products from animals. Thank you very much.
Xin chào các bạn. Vừa bị out mạng một chút đúng không ạ? Bây giờ chúng ta sẽ chuyển qua phần câu hỏi nhé. Thế nên là nếu bạn nào có câu hỏi gì thì các bạn có thể đặt ở trong phần box chat để chúng mình có thể đưa đến cho anh Dave. Hi Dave. Mình có mình có một số câu hỏi ở đây thì sẽ chuyển đến anh Dave luôn nha.
Hey Dave, there's some questions already, as you can see on the screen. Hope you can help answer to the people here today.
Chị Thanh to lên một chút được không?
Do you want me to read out the question for you, Dave?
Hi Dave, don't forget to unmute.
She's still on mute.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, that's better. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. It needed the host to unmute me. Okay, thanks very much. So you'd like me to look at some of the questions and answer some of the questions?
Yeah. Do you want me to read out the questions and then you
that's
answer?
Fine, yeah.
Okay. So the first question is, are there any legislations or livestock productions in Vietnam that meet and raise animals' welfare standards for farm animals?
I mean, Tang, you're probably in a better position than me to answer that. I mean, as far as I know, obviously there's the veterinary law, which is looking at some of those standards and trying to implement some better welfare standards. But yeah, you can probably answer that better than me directly for Vietnam.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer this question. Với câu hỏi của bạn về câu hỏi thứ nhất về Việt Nam hiện có những cái hình thức chăn nuôi hoặc đạo luật nào để gia tăng phúc lợi động vật trang trại thì hiện tại thì từ năm 2015 thì các quy định đã có các cái luật vào luật chăn nuôi 2015 và luật thú y 2017 và đều có hiệu lực vào từ năm 2019 và năm 2020 ấy, từ mùng 1 tháng 1 năm 2021 ấy, thì đều có các cái quy định thì yêu cầu đối với việc gọi là chăn nuôi nhân đạo và không gọi là yêu cầu về nhân đạo đối với động vật ấy, thì có các cái quy định như là từ điều 21 của luật chăn nuôi và từ điều 67 cho đến điều 73 của luật thú y ấy, thì đều có các cái quy định về việc giết mổ và vận chuyển động vật, trong đó có cái quy định không gây đau đớn, sợ hãi, căng thẳng cho động vật, đặc biệt là cái luật chăn nuôi thì yêu cầu trong quá trình giết mổ cũng có những quy định là động I was out. Mình tiếp tục thì vừa nãy mạng internet mình có vấn đề thì với các quy định này bạn có thể tham khảo thêm. Tuy nhiên là trong những năm gần đây thì quy định của pháp luật Việt Nam cũng đã bắt đầu có những điều lệ gọi là quy định về cái việc đối xử nhân đạo với động vật và đặc biệt cụ thể trong lĩnh vực chăn nuôi và trong các hoạt động giết mổ động vật. Và gần đây nhất thì có thông tư 24 24 của Thủ tướng Chính phủ về hướng dẫn về cái quy định xử phạt, trong đó bao gồm các cái hành động ngược đãi bị xử phạt như nào với cái mức tiền từ khoảng 500.000 cho tới 3 triệu đồng đối với những hành vi mà gây giết mổ động vật mà không làm mất ý thức trước. Cho nên là các bạn có thể tham khảo thêm những quy định này, và bên mình cũng có công bố, cũng có trích dẫn những cái thông điệp này trên trang fanpage, hoặc là bạn muốn tìm hiểu thêm cụ thể thì bên mình sẵn sàng trả lời thêm. Okay, so the two questions. The second question is that to you, Dave. A person asked, I saw that in Vietnam people are quite care for their pet and have a lot of campaigns against eating of dog and cat meat, while pigs, chickens, or cows are still in very are still like consumed a lot at a bigger scale. What do you think about that, and how to raise people's awareness about eating other animals, and how can people be more open about being vegetarian? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. I think there's a couple of ways, really. Firstly, there needs to be more promotion, about the conditions which these animals are raised within, so people can get more understanding about the lives of those animals, so that then maybe they can empathize with those animals a little bit more.
Và câu hỏi của bạn rất là hay và cũng không hoàn toàn là dễ trả lời, và một trong những cách mà theo anh Dave nghĩ rằng là mình có thể thay đổi hoặc là góp phần thay đổi cái điều này là cho mọi người thấy những cái điều kiện mà các loài động vật chăn nuôi lấy thịt tại các trang trại nó sống trong cái hoàn cảnh như nào để mọi người có thể nhận ra được.
But I also think we need to do more with that public awareness, which we haven't done with this talk, but on some of the other talks we are doing, where we're talking more about the emotional experiences of animals and just how they want to live their life and how they've evolved to live their life, so that people get a better understanding of who those animals are. And then hopefully, again, that will help them to empathize with them when people can understand that those animals have social relationships with each other and they have caring relationships with their youngsters.
Và một trong những cái điều khác nữa mà trong cái bài nói chuyện ngày hôm nay của chúng tôi thì chưa đề cập tới, tuy nhiên là trong những cái bài sắp tới chúng tôi sẽ cùng trao đổi vấn đề này, đó là cái đời sống cảm xúc hay là những cái khả năng trí giác của động vật với các cái loài mà chăn nuôi trang trại. Thì thông qua những cái thông tin đó thì mọi người cũng có thể hiểu được rằng những cái sinh vật đó là những cái động vật có trí giác, có cái cuộc sống riêng, và mọi người cũng có cái sự so sánh đối với bản thân và đưa ra những cái nhận định và những cái quyết định riêng của mình.
But actually, the one thing which is happening, and it's happening all over the world, and I expect it's happening in Vietnam, is that other options are becoming available in all of the stores that we shop in and all of the fast food restaurants. So plant-based options, plant-based burgers are now commonplace in places like McDonald's and in Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken in many places around the world. And I think that's actually really important, because it goes then from just being sort of like something which is very much sort of a small percentage of the population who are vegan or vegetarian. It just becomes very mainstream, and it just becomes quite normal for people to either choose to eat a chicken burger or to eat a plant-based chicken burger.
Và một điều nữa mà chúng ta cũng có thể nhận thấy khá là rõ ràng ngày nay là hiện tại với cái việc tiêu thụ thực phẩm, chúng ta có rất là nhiều lựa chọn khác nhau, và thậm chí cả những cái cửa hàng mà trước kia là chuyên chỉ bán các sản phẩm từ thịt động vật như là burger hoặc McDonald's hoặc là KFC, thì hiện tại cũng đã có những cái lựa chọn khác về thực phẩm là đồ chay hoặc là không có nguồn gốc từ động vật để mọi người có thể lựa chọn. Và trước kia thì cái tỷ lệ người mà ăn chay và các sản phẩm đồ chay rất là ít, rất là hạn chế, nhưng hiện tại thì cái mức độ phổ biến của các sản phẩm này rất nhiều, và do đó mọi người hoàn toàn có quyền và có thể lựa chọn những sản phẩm thay thế đó. Okay. So it's come to the third question. Many organizations are now calling people to raise animal welfare standards for farmed animals, but in the end, they still will be killed. Is that a conflict?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is slightly conflicting, but I think we do have to, maybe raise that issue of what is animal welfare and what is animal rights. And so if you are purely just concerned about welfare, then welfare really is just ensuring that an animal lives a good quality of life up until the point of its death. And so therefore some organizations will promote having better living conditions for animals before they're slaughtered.
Và thì câu hỏi của bạn này cũng rất là hay, và đúng là cũng có những cái sự gọi là khác biệt hay là đối lập trong cái vấn đề này. Tuy nhiên là chúng ta có thể nhìn nhận theo các cái góc độ khác nhau, và nếu mà theo hai hai hướng, một ở dưới góc độ là về phúc lợi động vật hay là quyền động vật, thì các bạn cũng có thể hiểu thêm rằng là với những người mà nhìn dưới góc độ phúc lợi động vật ấy, thì chúng ta có làm sao để có những cái thay đổi hoặc có những cái hành động để động vật nó có được cái chất lượng cuộc sống tốt nhất cho từ khi mà nó được sinh ra, trong quá trình nó được nuôi dưỡng và cho tới cái thời điểm mà nó chết đi hoặc bị giết thịt.
But the other side of that, obviously, is if you are concerned about the ethical raising of animals for consumption, then really, from that side, then it's wrong to raise animals at all, whatever conditions they're raised in, because they will also, they will obviously lose their life at a much earlier stage than they would do naturally. So therefore, from a rights point of view, then no, it's not acceptable to raise any animals for food.
Vâng, và tuy nhiên là nếu các bạn đứng dưới cái góc độ mà quyền động vật hoặc là ngay cả trong phúc lợi động vật, nhưng mà nhìn ở cái góc độ về chúng ta, như trong cái bài thuyết trình có nói, tiêu thụ động vật ở cái độ tuổi nó rất là nhỏ so với cái tuổi đời tự nhiên của động vật ấy, thì đó là một cái vấn đề đạo đức, mà là một cái câu hỏi đạo đức mà cần phải đặt ra.
I actually think the two can be kind of combined in that, being realistic, we are going to continue to eat animals for many, many decades to come. And so therefore, even though I personally would like to see an end to animal consumption, I do think it's very important that we, during that time period where alternatives are becoming more mainstream, then I think it's important that some animals the standards for raising animals is actually improved. So I think there is a case for people and organizations for very much work alongside governments and farmers to raise animal welfare standards, as well as other people calling for an end to animal consumption.
Tuy nhiên thì trước cái sự đối lập của hai cái góc độ này, thì chúng ta cũng có thể là hướng tới một cái điểm chung và ở một cái mức ở giữa. Bởi vì là mặc dù là cá nhân tôi rất là muốn là tất cả thế giới này sẽ chấm dứt cái việc tiêu thụ động vật, tuy nhiên là có thể nói là trong hàng nhiều thập kỷ nữa điều này là vẫn chưa thể thực hiện được, và từ đó trở đi thì từ giờ cho tới lúc đó thì cách mà chúng ta thực hiện, trong khi là những người mà theo kêu gọi cho quyền động vật vẫn có thể tiếp tục gọi là kêu gọi những cái thay đổi đó, thì chúng ta vẫn có thể làm việc với những người nông dân, với các những người mà cơ quan ban hành pháp luật để mà thay đổi những cái điều kiện chăn nuôi, để cải thiện cái điều kiện chăn nuôi, để những động vật đang mà sẽ được nuôi tại các trang trại có cái điều kiện chăm sóc, điều kiện sinh sống nó được cải thiện tốt hơn. Okay. Right. The next question is that currently I eat vegan meals around 3 days a week, including fish. Should I continue reducing my meat consumption?
Okay, thanks for that question. Firstly, to be vegan means not to consume any animal products at all. So fish is an animal, so therefore, if you're eating fish as part of those meals, then they're not actually vegan in terms of the definition of what vegan is.
Thì trước hết với câu hỏi của bạn, thì là một người mà ăn thuần chay mà gọi là vegan ấy, thì có nghĩa là người đó không sử dụng bất kỳ các sản phẩm nào mà liên quan đến động vật, và trong trường hợp này thì cá, nếu mà bạn vẫn còn ăn cá thì cá cũng vẫn là một loài động vật, cho nên nếu mà theo cái định nghĩa về là một người ăn thuần chay ấy, thuần thực vật, thì nó chưa hoàn toàn đúng trong cái trường hợp này.
And I mentioned that really it's good that the issue of fish is raised here, because although during that talk I didn't actually talk about fish, then there's actually far more fish which are eaten than any of the other animals, and a lot of those are either wild caught fish, but also increasingly they're now fish from fish farms, and again those fish are suffering quite considerably on those fish farms in terms of the intensification of the way that they're being raised. And so there's a lot of welfare issues with regarding raising fish on fish farms, but also in terms of the way that fish are slaughtered as well, and the way that they're caught, which is then causing them quite a lot of suffering.
Và cũng rất là tốt khi mà bạn có đề cập cá trong cái câu hỏi của bạn, bởi vì mặc dù trong cái bài thuyết trình tôi chưa nói về cái loài động vật này, tuy nhiên đây là một cái loài mà hiện tại đang được khai thác ở cái mức quy mô nó có thể coi là lớn nhất trên toàn cầu, và hầu hết là cá sẽ được đánh bắt từ tự nhiên, từ môi trường tự nhiên. Và tuy nhiên là trong những năm gần đây thì cái xu hướng đang ngày càng có nhiều cá được nuôi tại các cái trang trại hơn, và những cái điều kiện chăn nuôi cá hay là giết mổ thì đều gây ra những cái vấn đề về phúc lợi đối với cái loài động vật này.
And the second part of that, should I reduce my meat consumption? Then yes, I think people should. It's a personal choice. So, it is entirely up to you. But I think reducing your meat consumption is obviously going to have benefits, for the environment, potential benefits for your health, and obviously benefits for the animals. So yes, I think everybody, all of us, should at least address our meat consumption amounts and try to reduce them in some way.
Phần bạn hỏi là liệu có nên tiếp tục cắt giảm lượng thịt tiêu thụ của mình không ấy, thì cá nhân tôi thấy rất là khuyến khích bạn nên làm điều này, và cũng khuyến khích tất cả các bạn ở đây nữa, vì có thể cân nhắc lại hoặc xác định lại cái lượng thịt động vật mà mình tiêu thụ trong các cái khẩu phần ăn hàng ngày của mình. Và các bạn điều này thì cũng có những cái tác dụng như tôi đã nói, tốt, tích cực tới môi trường, tới có sức khỏe của bạn, cũng như tới các cái loài động vật. So the next question is that I read some articles and researches that say humans still need animal protein to grow and cannot be replaced by protein in vegetables. Is that true?
No, it's not true. I mean, animals get their protein from vegetables. So, we feed vegetable products to animals, and the animals then get all of their protein from those vegetables. So the pigs and the cows and chickens, etc., are getting their protein from that source. And for us, we can cut out that animal part of that equation and eat the vegetables directly. It's true we need to eat a varied amount of vegetables. You can't just eat a small number of vegetables, but as long as you eat a very varied amount of vegetables, then you will get enough protein from your vegetables. And there are many people that have been vegan their entire lives and have never suffered from a lack of protein. So it's it isn't true. You can get all of your protein needs from vegetables.
Và cái điều này thì theo như câu hỏi của bạn thì hoàn toàn là không đúng ạ, vì hầu hết các cái loài động vật đều lấy dinh dưỡng từ thực vật, và do đó là con người chúng ta cũng hoàn toàn có thể hấp thụ dinh dưỡng từ các cái thực vật đó mà không lo bị thiếu chất, thiếu protein ấy. Thì chỉ có điều là khi mà chúng ta quyết định chuyển sang chế độ ăn thuần thực vật thì bạn nên đa dạng hóa cái bữa ăn của mình với các nhiều loại thực vật khác nhau. Và tôi cũng và chắc các bạn tìm hiểu cũng biết rằng có rất là nhiều người và ăn theo chế độ ăn thuần chay hay thuần thực vật từ nhỏ, hoặc là rất là nhiều năm, thời gian dài trong cả cuộc đời của họ, và hầu hết thì đều không có bị các cái vấn đề về thiếu chất mà như bạn lo ngại. Okay. So the next question is that in Vietnam there are many small-scale farms that are farming animals, and they use their garden for animal to like live freely. Is that suitable husbandry method for human to consume? And currently in Vietnam, such small-scale livestock production is the main income for a lot of families, and encouraging people to become vegetarians and stopping the use of meat may cause a problem for them. Should we still do it?
Yeah, no, this is a particular issue. And again, I'm not really the best person to answer that because, I don't live in Vietnam, and the system here in the UK is very different in that, we do not have small scale animal farming anymore. And everybody, or majority, 99.9% of the population are getting their food from supermarkets, or from restaurants. So it is slightly different. I'll carry on after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thì thực ra vấn đề này ở Việt Nam thì tôi cũng không khó để mà trả lời cho rõ ràng được. Nhưng mà đối với cái tình trạng ở UK, ở Anh ấy, thì hầu hết là mọi người mua thực phẩm từ các siêu thị, và có thể nói là tới 99,9%, chứ mọi người không chăn nuôi trong cái quy mô nhỏ để làm thức ăn cho mình. Do đó thì câu chuyện đấy nó hơi khác nhau giữa Việt Nam và hiện tại nơi tôi sinh sống.
I would say that a lot of the animals in those small scale farming systems have a much better quality of life than a lot of animals which are in intensive production. So therefore, yes, from a welfare point of view, then it is likely that a lot of animals will have a much more natural life. As we know, often involves animals living in and around where people live. And so, they get freedom of access to, they can roam. They're often spend time with each other. They're not being crated into small areas, into small cages. So the welfare of those animals is potentially considerably better.
Tuy nhiên, xét về cái góc độ phúc lợi động vật thì rõ ràng là với những động vật mà chăn nuôi ở cái quy mô gia đình, nơi mà với cái số lượng nhỏ và động vật không bị nuôi ở các cái trang trại mà trong cái điều kiện rất là chật chội, thì động vật chăn nuôi quy mô nhỏ như ở Việt Nam mà bạn mô tả thì nó có cái phúc lợi tốt hơn khi mà động vật không bị nhồi nhét trong điều kiện chật chội và có thể tương tác với đồng loại, có thể di chuyển tự do ở ngoài trời, ngoài thiên nhiên, và do đó thì xét về góc độ đó thì những động vật đó có cái phúc lợi tốt hơn.
Do you want to add your thoughts on that, Tang, from being in Vietnam?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll talk about the transport and the slaughter, just so you know.
Yeah.
Ngoài ra thì tôi cũng có muốn bổ sung rằng là cái khi mà xét tới về phúc lợi động vật thì chúng ta xét tới cả một cái quá trình về từ lúc động vật mà sinh ra và chăn nuôi và lúc giết mổ nữa, chết đi nữa. Thì mặc dù là ở cái quy mô nhỏ như thế thì như anh Dave có nói, và là động vật nó có cái chất lượng sống tốt hơn và nó có cái phúc lợi động vật tốt hơn. Tuy nhiên là một cái vấn đề khác nữa mà khi mà chúng ta xét tới toàn thể về phúc lợi động vật thì gồm cả cái quá trình mà chăn nuôi, vận chuyển hoặc giết mổ, thì hầu hết là cái quy định mà giết mổ động vật nó ở Việt Nam ấy, nó chưa rõ ràng và chưa có cái, gần đây mới có trong cái luật chăn nuôi và áp dụng năm 2010, từ 1 tháng 1 2021 thì mới có quy định là phải gây ngất, mất ý thức của động vật trong cái trước khi giết mổ. Tuy nhiên là cái việc gọi là quy định của pháp luật tới thực tế thì nó vẫn còn rất là nhiều thời gian để thành sự thực được, và cho tới khi đó thì cái việc giết mổ động vật ở Việt Nam vẫn là một cái hoạt động vẫn gây đau đớn cho động vật, khi mà hầu hết mọi người giết bằng cách là gọi là cắt tiết, mặc dù là gà hay là heo hay là bò hay gì thì đều theo cái phương pháp đó, và đây là một cái hình thức mà theo xét về góc độ phúc lợi động vật thì nó rất là dã man, và trong quá trình mà vận chuyển nữa thì động vật cũng bị nhồi nhét, thì do đó những cái việc cải thiện hay về xét về phúc lợi động vật thì những điểm đó vẫn cần phải cải thiện và vẫn chưa đáp ứng được. The next question from the participant is that whether veganism is completely healthy, or whether people will have a lack of nutrition from being vegan, and some products such as dairy, eggs, honey, and there's a process of making those products violate animal welfare, and should we continue to use them?
Yeah, well, again, veganism and plant-based diets can definitely be healthy. It really does depend on how varied your diet is and making sure that you do eat a varied diet. And, there are alternatives to all of these products now. So there are dairy alternatives. There are alternatives to honey, which again are just as healthy as eating some of those products are. So, I would say sorry, content.
Và như tôi có trả lời trước đó, và các bạn cũng có thể tìm hiểu thêm, và các cái chế độ ăn thuần thực vật thuần chay ấy, thì hoàn toàn đảm bảo đầy đủ sức khỏe cho các bạn. Và nếu mà các bạn vẫn còn muốn sử dụng các sản phẩm như là sữa hay trứng hay mật ong, thì hiện tại cũng có rất nhiều các sản phẩm thay thế cho các sản phẩm này, và cũng hoàn toàn đảm bảo được dinh dưỡng cũng như mùi vị.
And so yes, the alternatives which are available now are healthy alternatives, which often don't contain some of the impurities that the animal protein products contain. So some of the either the antibiotics or the hormones which are being pumped into animals, which we are then consuming. So those products are generally a lot healthier than they are if you continue to consume products, particularly dairy products.
Ngoài ra thì những cái sản phẩm thay thế từ động vật này thì nó có những cái ưu điểm khác nữa, là nó không chứa các cái thành phần mà gọi là hợp chất hay là những cái chất hóa học mà gây hại trong cái quá trình chăn nuôi sản xuất ra ấy. Ví dụ như là thuốc kháng sinh chẳng hạn, thì những sản phẩm thay thế thường là nó an toàn hơn đối với sức khỏe của người sử dụng ở góc độ đó. Right. There's a vet student who wants to join our team. What are the opportunities? Với bạn, nếu mà hiện tại đang là sinh viên thú y thì bạn có rất là nhiều việc mà bạn cũng có thể giúp đỡ được, thì bạn có thể liên hệ với bên mình qua fanpage hoặc để lại email ở đó và trao đổi về những cái mong muốn của bạn khi ra trường, hoặc bên mình cũng hiện tại cũng có thể hỗ trợ các bạn về việc cung cấp kiến thức trong quá trình học tập của các bạn liên quan đến những vấn đề mà bạn mong muốn tìm hiểu. Tuy nhiên là cụ thể thì sẽ tùy thuộc vào những cái gọi là cái công việc thực tế, nên cái nhu cầu thực tế. Bọn mình sẽ liên hệ với bạn nếu mà bạn để lại thông tin với mình, liên lạc lại qua fanpage. Right. The next question is that livestock production also contributes to a lot to the economy. How should we change the direction of animals like pigs, cows, chicken, ducks, etc. To ensure more animal welfare and limit negative impacts on life? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and I don't really have a great answer for that, because yes, the economy is always something which is forefront of the government's mind, and as soon as it starts to impact on the economy, then it becomes a bigger issue for any government. What I would say is that, and I don't know for Vietnam, so it's difficult for me to put it into a Vietnamese context, but I know for the European Union and for the USA, then the amount of money the government gives out in agriculture is huge. The amount of subsidies that it has to give to farmers to be able to continue to produce food is actually, far more than it actually gets in for the economy, for the price that people pay for that food. So it's a very inefficient economic system.
Và đây là một cái vấn đề rất là khó, gọi là khó giải quyết, vì nó liên quan đến cái giá trị kinh tế, và trong mắt của tất cả các cơ quan nhà nước, của các chính trị gia, thì vấn đề kinh tế của một quốc gia hay của một ngành công nghiệp nó luôn luôn là ưu tiên hàng đầu. Thì tôi cũng không có đủ thông tin để nói về bối cảnh ở Việt Nam. Tuy nhiên ở các quốc gia EU ấy, thì hiện nay thì người ta cũng đã nhận ra rằng cái nguồn đầu tư vào cái ngành chăn nuôi thâm canh này nó rất là lớn, và tuy nhiên cái hiệu quả, cái giá trị đầu ra thì nó lại không hiệu quả so với cái số vốn đầu tư vào ban đầu, và người ta phải đầu tư rất nhiều vào cái việc chăn nuôi và quảng cáo hoặc là sử dụng các cái sản phẩm thuốc trong chăn nuôi.
And that's mainly because meat eating is very cheap. So, you know, if you go to a supermarket and you want to buy a chicken, or a fast food restaurant and you want to buy chicken burgers or whatever, then it's actually very cheap, and it's actually not that economical for the farmers to raise animals in the way that they do at that price. So therefore, the government in many countries, and say across the European Union, in the UK and in America, is paying out lots of money to ensure that farmers can continue to raise animals, because they obviously want enough food for people in the population to eat. So yeah, it's quite an inefficient economic system.
Và thực tế thì ở các quốc gia như ở châu Âu hoặc ở Mỹ thì các chính phủ thậm chí phải trợ cấp hay là tài trợ cho các cái bổ sung chi phí hoạt động cho các ngành công nghiệp này rất là nhiều, vì với cái mức chi phí mà họ đầu tư để chăn nuôi ấy, và với cái giá thực phẩm rất là rẻ khi mà bán tại các siêu thị và nhà hàng, thì người nông dân chăn nuôi ấy, họ không có đạt được cái hiệu suất cao cho lắm đâu, nên đây là một cái ngành, một cái hoạt động gọi là kinh tế có thể coi là kém hiệu quả đấy. So next question is that what kinds of fossil fuels used in livestock industry, and how are they used? Let's make an assumption that more and more people shift into like vegan diet. For example, half of the citizen on Earth. So we would also need a huge amount of land for growing vegetables. That means people might use a larger amount of pesticides and herbicides, which badly affects the land, and forests could also continuously chopped down to have more land for growing vegetable. So how do you think about the impact of shifting into vegan and vegetarians?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. The first one, the majority of fossil fuel is going to be used in things like oil, which is in the transportation either of the animals themselves or the food that they eat, and then obviously the transportation of the products, the final product, which is then going after the animal's been slaughtered and the meat's been processed, it then gets transported around the world to supermarkets and then eventually ends up in people's homes. So the fossil fuel use is probably more on that. Is mainly the use of oil.
Cái nguyên liệu hóa thạch mà chúng ta nói tới ở đây là dầu mà con người sử dụng trong cái quá trình vận chuyển. Vì khi chúng ta chăn nuôi động vật thì những nhà mà gọi là chăn nuôi hoặc cái lò mổ, người ta sẽ phải thu gom động vật và vận chuyển động vật tới lò mổ. Sau đó thì từ các lò mổ thì xử lý động vật xong thì chuyển tới các sản phẩm thịt đó tới siêu thị, rồi từ siêu thị thì tới các hộ gia đình. Và trong các quá trình di chuyển hay là vận chuyển đó thì chúng ta sử dụng dầu hỏa để xăng dầu để làm nguyên liệu hóa thạch trong quá trình này.
But with regards the land use, then actually we currently use a lot of land to grow food to feed to animals, and so if everybody not that this is going to happen, but if everybody in the world became plant eaters, vegan overnight, there would actually be a huge amount of land which would be available, which we could then give back to nature, because we wouldn't be growing, huge quantities of food to feed to animals.
Về vấn đề mà sử dụng đất hiện tại ấy, thì rất nhiều diện tích đất hiện nay đang được sử dụng để mà trồng các loại thực vật hay thức ăn để cho cái ngành chăn nuôi. Và thực tế ra nếu mà giả dụ như là nửa thế giới hay cả thế giới mà sau một đêm chuyển sang ăn chay thì còn rất nhiều cái diện tích hiện tại đang được sử dụng sẽ được trả lại tự nhiên, tại vì chúng ta không còn cần phải sử dụng cái diện tích đất đó để nuôi động vật nữa, và sử dụng để nuôi trồng các loại thực phẩm cho con người thì nó sẽ tốn ít diện tích hơn.
So instantly, there's over 40% of the crops that we grow are being fed to animals. So there's 40% of the land which is now being used for agriculture would no longer be needed to be used, because there wouldn't be any need, obviously, to grow that food to feed to animals. So yes, we would have to use some more land to grow more vegetables, but it certainly wouldn't be anywhere near the amount of land which is currently being used to feed to animals, and then also the land which is used to raise those animals as well. So the system under a plant-based diet would be far more efficient and would use far less land, and therefore would use far less inputs of things like pesticides and herbicides than the system that we currently have.
Và hiện tại thì có tới 40% diện tích đất mà chúng ta đang sử dụng là để phục vụ ngành chăn nuôi, như đã nói thì là trồng thực phẩm cho động vật. Thì khi mà thế giới mà chuyển sang ăn chay nhiều hơn thì cái diện tích đất đó sẽ được trả lại tự nhiên nhiều hơn, và chúng ta sẽ không cần sử dụng cái diện tích đó. Và ngoài ra là với số lượng đất hay là số lượng các cái mùa màng nó giảm đi thì cái lượng thuốc trừ sâu, thuốc bảo vệ thực vật nó cũng sẽ, mà con người chúng ta phải sử dụng cũng sẽ giảm đi. The next question is that currently the model of raising laying hens in a more humane way is developing, and there are also a few organizations certified for this in Vietnam. May I ask if this model in Vietnam will have a good development direction in the future?
Yeah, I think that's something which has happened in other parts of the world, and here in the United Kingdom now, I think somewhere in the region of about 50% of hens are raised outside of cage production, so either barn production or free-range production, and that's because of certification systems that have been used across Europe. So people have now become used to knowing whether they're buying eggs or products containing eggs from caged hens or whether they're buying them from barn or free range. So I certainly think it's certainly a step forward in terms of improving the welfare of those individual animals, and certification systems are a really good way of actually giving people information about where the provenance of their food is.
Vâng, đúng là điều này thì cũng đang là một cái xu hướng và đang diễn ra ở Anh cũng như nhiều nơi khác. Thì như ở Anh thì hiện tại có khoảng 50% các cái sản phẩm trứng gà là hiện tại đang được nuôi ở các cái trang trại mà đã được cấp chứng nhận là nhân đạo với động vật. Tức là gà được nuôi có cái không gian để đi lại và ở trong, hoặc là được tự do nuôi, gọi là nuôi thả bộ ở ngoài trời, thay vì ở trong các cái trang trại công nghiệp, trang trại nhà máy. Thì cái việc dán nhãn này thì nó có tác dụng rất là tốt, là cung cấp thông tin cho mọi người để mọi người có cái lựa chọn rằng là họ có ủng hộ các cái sản phẩm nó thân thiện hơn với động vật, hay là có cái đảm bảo phúc lợi tốt hơn cho động vật hay không. Right. I think that's the end of the question that we received. I'll ask if there's anyone here wants to ask directly, then they can unmute themselves and ask. Rồi, các bạn có thể tiếp tục đặt câu hỏi, hoặc các bạn muốn đặt câu hỏi trực tiếp với anh Dave bằng tiếng Anh hoặc bằng tiếng Việt thì có thể tự mở mic và để trao đổi với diễn giả. Rồi, nếu mà không có câu hỏi gì thêm thì nhân tiện ngày hôm nay thì bên mình cũng muốn quảng cáo một cái sự kiện sắp tới một chút, là đến đầu tháng 10 thì tổ chức của bên mình cùng với rất nhiều các tổ chức khác trong Liên minh châu Á vì động vật cũng sẽ kỷ niệm cái ngày quốc tế động vật chăn nuôi, và nó gọi là World Farm Animal Day ấy. Nó được tổ chức, nó là ngày mùng 4 tháng 10 hàng năm. Tuy nhiên là ở châu Á thì tổ chức bên mình cùng 21 tổ chức khác trong Liên minh châu Á vì động vật thì có quyết định là trong 2 năm trở lại đây, năm này năm thứ 2 sẽ tổ chức riêng một cái ngày gọi là ngày kỷ niệm động vật chăn nuôi trang trại tại châu Á, gọi là Asia Farm Animal Day. Thì năm nay thì sẽ diễn ra vào ngày mùng 7, mùng 8 và mùng 10 Thì với ngày mùng 7, mùng 8 thì sẽ có tất cả các tổ chức, hiện tại là trong Liên minh châu Á có khoảng hơn 300 tổ chức, thì sẽ có các cái hoạt động gọi là giới thiệu về cái chương trình của mình, cũng như là các cái kế hoạch sắp tới, cũng như là thảo luận để có cái sự hợp tác tốt hơn cho các động vật trong trang trại. Và tới vào ngày mùng 10 tháng 10, nó vào chủ nhật, thì tổ chức bên mình cũng có mời các diễn giả từ một số nhóm và tổ chức khác tại Việt Nam để nêu ra cái vấn đề về động vật nuôi trang trại. Thì các bạn có thể theo dõi thêm, bọn mình sẽ cung cấp những cái thông tin cụ thể cũng như cái đường link để các bạn theo dõi vào sự kiện vào ngày này. Và trong sự kiện này thì bên mình các bạn cũng sẽ tìm hiểu thêm được những cái vấn đề hoặc là cái tương lai mà các tổ chức đang hướng mọi người tới, để có thể hỗ trợ tốt hơn cho các loài động vật chăn nuôi trang trại. Okay, just promote the event, Farm Memorial Day event, Dave.
Yeah, good, excellent.
Nếu như không còn câu hỏi gì nữa thì bên mình sẽ kết thúc buổi livestream ở đây, buổi nói chuyện này ngay ở đây nha. Cái thông tin về phần câu hỏi và link video thì mình sẽ gửi lại cho các bạn sau qua phần qua email. Các bạn có thể check mail để nhận được những cái thông tin cần thiết nhé. Với cả những cái thông tin mà anh vừa đưa lên ấy, thì bên mình cũng sẽ viết kỹ hơn, chia sẻ kỹ hơn trên fanpage, thì các bạn có thể xem ở trên đấy nhá. Và rất mong là sẽ tiếp tục nhận được sự ủng hộ của các bạn trong những cái buổi chia sẻ về động vật sắp tới.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dave, for your time and for being here and sharing the information. And thanks, Hương and the team for organizing this event. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.